The Dominion drifted quietly through the endless stretch of space. The stars outside glowed softly, casting a calm light on the ship's hull. Inside, the crew worked with steady efficiency, a routine they were used to after countless days in deep space. The captain, Commander Ellis, stood at the command console, her eyes scanning the screen, as usual, though she felt a sense of unease she couldn't shake. It was just a feeling, but something about this mission seemed off. "Everything's running smoothly," reported Lieutenant Jones from his station, his voice steady as always. "Good," Ellis replied, though she didn't sound convinced. She looked out at the stars again, a vast sea of unknowns. "Keep an eye on the long-range scanners. We don't want any surprises." Jones gave a quick nod, his fingers flying over the controls. The rest of the crew continued their work, but there was an air of quiet anticipation, like they were all waiting for something to happen. Space was peaceful, but that peace was often a lie. It could shift in an instant, and they all knew it. The ship's radar flickered momentarily, a slight disturbance. Ella's eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer to the console. The screen showed a series of weak signals, just noise at first, probably just some cosmic interference, nothing to worry about. But then it happened again, a sudden spike. She leaned forward. "Lieutenant, what's causing that spike?" Jones was already on it, his hands moving quickly. "I'm not sure, Captain. It doesn't match any known patterns, but it's consistent." Ellis stood still for a moment, considering the possibilities. Space was full of odd signals. Most of them were harmless, the result of cosmic radiation or minor anomalies. But that didn't explain why the signal seemed so deliberate, almost as if it was trying to be detected. "Can we get a clearer reading?" she asked. Jones adjusted a few settings, his brow furrowing as he tried to get more information. The signal came and went, a strange pattern that didn't belong. It was almost like something, or someone, was out there, watching them. Suddenly, the ship's sensors went wild. A series of alarms blared, making the crew jump to action. A full scan of the area around them lit up the bridge like a beacon. Something was out there, something large, and it was moving fast. "Captain, we've got multiple objects approaching," Jones reported, his voice now tight with urgency. "They're not identified, and they're on a direct course for us." Ella's heart skipped a beat. "How far?" "Less than 15 minutes." The bridge was filled with a sudden, uncomfortable energy. The crew moved with practiced haste, trying to assess the situation. Lieutenant Reynolds, the communications officer, quickly adjusted his station, trying to make sense of the incoming signals. The tension in the room was palpable. There was no hiding the fact that something had just changed, and it was happening quickly. "Shall I alert the fleet?" Reynolds asked. Ellis paused, staring at the data before her. The Dominion was a warship, built to fight, but this was no ordinary encounter. Whoever, or whatever, was coming their way was unlike anything they had seen before. She couldn't help but wonder if it was a routine scouting mission. Maybe some unknown force was just passing by, or perhaps, more dangerously, it was an attack. "Alert the fleet, but don't raise any alarms yet," Ellis ordered, her voice steady, but carrying an edge of authority. "I want to be sure before we send out a signal." The crew was quick to follow orders, each person moving in sync as they adjusted their stations and prepared for what could be a routine encounter, or the beginning of something much more dangerous. Ellis couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. The Dominion had been through countless skirmishes, but this felt different. It wasn't just the unknown presence heading toward them. It was the way the signals had come out of nowhere, how they seemed so purposeful. She had no proof, no clear evidence to back it up, but she felt it in her bones. This wasn't just another routine mission. "Reynolds," she said, breaking her thoughts, "send a tight band transmission to the fleet. Just a heads up. We'll stay on alert until we know more." The officer gave a sharp nod, his fingers flying over his controls. There was a brief pause before he spoke again. "Transmission sent," Captain. Ellis watched the stars outside, her mind working. 1,000 questions raced through her thoughts, each one more urgent than the last. What if this wasn't a simple encounter? What if they were about to stumble into something much bigger, something they couldn't possibly be prepared for? The ship's sensors continued to monitor the objects closing in. They were moving fast, faster than anything the Dominion had encountered before. Ellis could feel the tension building in her chest. She had to stay calm. The crew needed her to stay calm. Then, as if to answer her thoughts, a sudden transmission crackled through the comms. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable. Something was communicating with them. It wasn't a friendly message. It wasn't anything they had ever heard before. Ellis turned to Jones, her voice low but urgent. "Are we being targeted?" He looked at the screen, his face pale. "It seems so, Captain, but I can't confirm who or what it is yet." Ellis felt her pulse quicken. The calm before the storm was over. And whatever was coming next, they weren't ready for it. The Dominion shook slightly as the unknown fleet drew closer. The sensors were now buzzing with activity, picking up multiple ships surrounding them in a formation that left no room for escape. Commander Ellis stood at the helm, her mind racing through all possible scenarios. The crew, still processing the sudden escalation, began working with newfound urgency. "Can you identify them yet?" Ellis asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Lieutenant Jones adjusted his console, eyes scanning the data. "Not yet, Captain. The readings are scrambled. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. They're using technology that's not on any of our charts." "Keep trying," Ellis said, her gaze never leaving the screens. She knew it was crucial to figure out who, or what, they were dealing with. As the minutes ticked by, the feeling of being trapped in space, surrounded by the unknown, grew stronger. There was no escape. Every sensor, every piece of technology on board the Dominion was telling them the same thing. They were not alone, and whoever these beings were, they were not here for friendly conversation. "Captain," Lieutenant Reynolds called from his station, his voice tense. "I've intercepted a communication. It's not in any language we know, but it's definitely a message." Ellis felt a chill run through her. Communication was never a good sign when there was no clear understanding of the intentions behind it. The transmission seemed to be designed to confuse, its static-heavy distortion making it impossible to interpret. It wasn't the type of message you would send if you were hoping for a peaceful meeting. "Can you translate it?" Ellis asked. "I'm working on it, but it's a complex transmission," Reynolds replied, his fingers flying over the console. "It seems like they're attempting to bypass our communication systems, Captain." The idea of an alien race being able to breach their communication systems so easily made Ellis' stomach tighten. They had prepared for hostile encounters in the past, but nothing like this. Nothing that suggested an intelligence so advanced that they could hack into a ship's systems without even firing a shot. "We have to be prepared for anything," Ellis said, her voice calm but with an underlying sense of urgency. "Weapons are ready." "Ready to engage on your order, Captain," Jones answered. Ellis nodded. They weren't here to start a fight, but they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The ship's sensors continued to track the approaching fleet, now just minutes away. The unknown ships were massive, dwarfing the Dominion in size, and their movements were almost too precise, too coordinated. Ellis knew it was time to make a decision. The tension was thick in the air, and the crew had already begun their preparations. She turned to the crew with one last look of resolve. "We don't know who they are, but we can't let our guard down. Stand by for evasive maneuvers." The crew nodded in unison, each member fully aware that this could be the beginning of something they would never forget. But what could they do if the enemy was beyond their understanding? And why hadn't they opened fire yet? The fleet of alien ships hadn't made a move, but the silence was more terrifying than any battle cry could be. As the ships neared, the crew braced for the worst. Commander Ellis' mind raced through the options. They could try to communicate, though it seemed unlikely that these beings would want to make peace. The way they had approached, without any initial signs of aggression, suggested a calculated observation rather than an immediate threat. Perhaps they were waiting for a response. Perhaps they wanted to test the humans. But why? "Prepare for evasive action," Ellis ordered. Her voice was steady, but the weight of the unknown was heavy on her shoulders. She could feel it, the sharp, sudden change in the atmosphere, like the calm before a storm. The fleet of alien ships grew closer, and their movements became more synchronized. It was as though they were setting up for something, but the humans couldn't figure out what. Then, just as the tension was about to break, a strange phenomenon happened. One of the alien ships, larger than the others, began to drift away from the formation. It moved slowly, as though its path was being deliberately calculated. The Dominion crew watched in confusion. Why would one of them break away? Jones squinted at his screen, tracking the ship's movements. "Captain, it's moving toward us, but slowly, almost like it's observing us from a distance." Ellis' mind raced again. Could it be a scout? Maybe it was there to test their reaction, see how they would respond to the alien presence. The rest of the fleet remained in place, almost frozen, as though awaiting the decision of this one vessel. "We need to be cautious," Ellis said, her voice low but firm. "Keep your stations active. Stay alert." The strange ship drew closer, its sleek, unfamiliar shape casting a shadow over the Dominion's hull. Every crew member could feel the weight of the moment. Were they about to make first contact? Was this a peaceful exploration, or was something more menacing lying beneath the surface? The minutes stretched on, the ship moving ever so slowly, and still, the rest of the fleet held their ground, waiting. The crew of the Dominion stood on edge, unsure of what was to come. It was as if the universe had frozen for a moment, holding its breath. The silence that had fallen over the bridge was thick, almost suffocating. The entire crew had their eyes fixed on the strange alien ship, which had now drawn so close to the Dominion that it seemed to fill their view. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as if it was studying them. The rest of the fleet remained in place, keeping a careful distance. Everything about the situation was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. The unknown ships weren't hostile yet, but they weren't exactly friendly either. It was as if they were waiting for something. Commander Ellis stood at the command console, her fingers pressing gently against the surface. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation. The alien ship, despite its size, hadn't taken any aggressive action. The crew had been expecting an attack, but now, instead of the sharp sounds of battle, there was only the eerie hum of the ship's systems and the sound of breathing in the quiet air. Something wasn't right. "Captain," Lieutenant Jones said from his station, his voice low but urgent, "there's a shift in their formation. The other ships, they're starting to move, but they're not moving toward us. They're just holding position, almost like they're waiting." Ellis turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean, waiting?" "It's like they're waiting for a signal," Jones replied. "The lead ship is the only one moving. The others are holding back, almost like they're watching." Commander Ellis felt a cold shiver run down her spine. They were being observed, that much was clear. The thought sent a wave of unease through her, but she kept her face composed. "Can we make contact with them?" she asked. Reynolds, the communications officer, glanced at his console. He had been working nonstop trying to decode their strange transmissions, but so far, nothing had made sense. "I've tried multiple frequencies, Captain. Nothing's going through. It's like they're blocking us." Ellis nodded slowly. The situation was growing more puzzling by the minute. The crew was ready for combat, but none of them had been trained to deal with an enemy that wouldn't engage, that wouldn't even communicate. It was like they were being studied, tested, or perhaps even judged. But by who, and for what purpose? "Keep trying," Ellis ordered, turning back to the view screen. The lead ship continued to move slowly toward the Dominion, its surface gleaming faintly in the light of distant stars. It was a graceful, almost elegant craft, a stark contrast to the heavily armored warship she commanded. She could only imagine what kind of beings would construct such a vessel. As the ship closed the gap, there was a sudden change in the tone of the communication systems. A high-pitched frequency blared through the comms. It wasn't a sound they had heard before, but there was something familiar about it. It was as if the sound was trying to convey an emotion, a message. But it wasn't in any language the crew could understand. They had no way of interpreting it, but the feeling of urgency was unmistakable. "We've never heard anything like this," Reynolds said, his eyes wide. It's almost like a warning." Ella stood frozen, staring at the screen. Her instinct told her that this wasn't a typical situation. The alien ship was trying to communicate, but not in any way they could understand. The fact that they had gotten this close without initiating any overt hostilities was puzzling. There had to be a reason for this calculated approach. They weren't here to simply observe. They had something in mind, something far beyond what the Dominion's crew had anticipated. "Captain," Jones said, his voice hesitant, "the ship it's changing its course. It's coming closer now, and it's starting to emit a different kind of signal." "What kind of signal?" Ellis asked, her mind now racing with possibilities. "It's a low-frequency pulse," Jones explained, eyes scanning the data. "It's different from the last transmission, but it's definitely aimed directly at us." Ellis' mind clicked into overdrive. If they were trying to communicate, this was their best chance. But how could they understand something so foreign? The crew had no way of knowing whether the signal was an invitation, a threat, or something else entirely. All they could do was wait and hope that the ship would make its intentions clearer. The crew fell into an anxious silence as the signal continued. It hummed through the air like a distant melody, one that seemed to seep into their minds, making the atmosphere on the bridge heavier. It felt almost invasive, like the aliens were trying to probe their thoughts, their feelings. The uncertainty made everyone uneasy. "Do you think they'll attack?" Lieutenant Reynolds asked, his voice tight with concern. Ellis looked at the screen again. The alien ship had closed the distance significantly, and now it hovered just outside the Dominion's range. There were no signs of weapons, no hostile movements, just the eerie, low-frequency pulse continuing. "I don't know, but whatever they're doing, we can't sit here and wait for them to make the first move." She turned toward the crew, her eyes meeting each of theirs. They had been trained for moments like this, for unexpected encounters. But this was different. No manual, no protocols, could prepare them for an alien race that communicated through pulses and signals, who showed no signs of aggression, yet still surrounded them in a massive fleet. "We need to act, but carefully," Ellis continued. "Jones, see if we can get anything more from that signal. Reynolds, keep monitoring for any changes in their formation." The crew nodded and went back to their stations, the atmosphere thick with uncertainty. The lead alien ship now hovered just beyond the Dominion's reach, still sending out its pulse, its purpose still unknown. For the first time in a long while, Ellis wasn't sure how to proceed. It was as if they were on the edge of a precipice, and the next move could determine everything. But for now, they waited, and in the silence, the weight of the unknown hung heavily in the air. The stillness on the bridge was palpable, the weight of the unknown pressing down on the crew of the Dominion. The alien ship hovered just outside their reach, the strange, low-frequency pulse still emitting from its core, resonating through the hull of the ship. Commander Ellis stood at the front of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the view screen, watching the alien vessel with an intensity that matched the tension in the air. There was something about its calm, measured movements that unsettled her. It was as though the ship and its crew were studying them, observing every little response, every change in their behavior. "Captain," Jones spoke up, breaking the silence. "The signal, it's changing again." Ellis turned toward him. "What kind of change?" "It's slower now," Jones replied, his voice tense. "It's almost like it's waiting for a response from us. I can see patterns forming in the signal, as if it's trying to communicate something specific. Ellis glanced at the readouts on Joan's console, her brow furrowing as she studied the data. The signal was unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't simply a random noise or static, but a series of organized pulses, each one slightly different from the last, as if the alien ship was sending a coded message, but the crew had no way of decoding it. "We need to figure out what they're saying," Ellis said. "Is there any way to translate it?" "We're still working on it, Captain," Reynolds replied, his fingers dancing across the communication console. "But we've made little progress. The signal keeps shifting, and every time we think we're close to understanding, it changes again." The sense of frustration was starting to build, and Ellis could see it in the faces of the crew. They were all waiting for something, anything, that would give them a clue about the alien ship's intentions. Were they friend or foe? It was impossible to tell. They hadn't attacked, but they hadn't shown any signs of peaceful intentions either. It was like they were stuck in a limbo, caught between two worlds and unsure of which direction to take. "We can't just wait forever," Ellis said, her voice steady but firm. "We need to make a move, but we also need to be smart about it." She turned toward the view screen again, watching the alien ship's slow, deliberate movements. It was almost as if it was studying the Dominion as much as the Dominion was studying it. The ship was elegant, unlike anything the crew had ever seen. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and its sleek design made it look more like a piece of art than a vessel of war. But the more Ellis stared at it, the more she felt a sense of unease. Something about it seemed too perfect, too calculated. "I don't like this," she muttered to herself, though her voice was loud enough for the crew to hear. "There's no way we're the first to encounter them. There has to be someone who knows what these ships are, someone who has answers." Jones, who had been intently studying the sensor readings, spoke up. "We've tried reaching out to nearby fleets, Captain. No one's responding. It's like they've gone dark." Ellis' eyes widened. That wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. "Are you saying no one else has been in contact with these ships?" "That's what it looks like," Jones replied. "The entire sector seems to be avoiding this area. It's like they know something we don't." A chill ran down Ellis' spine. If entire fleets were avoiding this area, there was a reason. And if that reason was tied to these strange ships, the crew of the Dominion was facing a situation far more complex than they had anticipated. "Do we have any other ships in the vicinity?" Ellis asked, her voice laced with concern. "We've contacted everyone within range, Captain," Reynolds confirmed. "But no one is responding. It's like they've all gone silent, or they're intentionally avoiding us." The isolation of it all hit Ellis hard. The Dominion and her crew were alone in the vast emptiness of space, surrounded by ships that seemed to defy every rule they had ever known about alien encounters. The uncertainty of the situation was starting to gnaw at her. "We're not alone out here," Ellis said, more to herself than to anyone else. "Something's going on." But what? As if on cue, the strange alien ship made its move. Slowly, it began to retract, its position shifting slightly. The subtle motion was enough to make the Dominion crew tense. Were they about to make their move? Were they going to attack? The thought was unnerving, but it didn't make sense. Why hadn't they attacked already if that was their goal? Why were they waiting? "Captain," Jones spoke again, his voice tense. "There's something strange happening." Ellis turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "What is it?" "The signal. It's not just a communication anymore. It's interacting with our systems. I'm seeing patterns, but they're not coming from us. The alien ship is somehow influencing our systems, like it's reading our responses." Ellis felt her heart skip a beat. "Are you saying it's trying to communicate directly with our systems?" "It's possible," Jones said, his fingers still moving across the console. "It's like it's testing us, watching how we react to different signals. But the way it's doing it, it's almost like it knows exactly how we're going to respond." The realization hit Ellis hard. The alien ship wasn't just trying to communicate, it was trying to understand them, to learn their behavior. And with that knowledge, it could predict their every move. "Prepare the crew for anything," Ellis ordered, her voice unwavering despite the rising sense of dread. "We don't know what they're capable of, but we're not going to let them control the situation." The crew nodded, their faces set with determination. They had prepared for combat. They had prepared for negotiations, but nothing had prepared them for an alien race that could influence their systems, their thoughts, their actions. They were in uncharted territory, and for the first time, they truly didn't know what to expect next. The alien ship continued its slow approach, the signal still pulsing, still shifting. It was as if they were being drawn into a game they hadn't agreed to play. But Ellis knew one thing for sure: they had to stay alert. The next move, whatever it might be, could change everything. The Dominion's crew had entered a state of heightened alert. The tension in the air on the bridge was now almost unbearable, and the crew members moved with a sense of purpose, each one keeping a watchful eye on the alien vessel. The strange pulses from the alien ship had continued, but now they were joined by something more troubling. The pulses had begun to synchronize with the Dominion's systems in strange and unexpected ways. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a subtle, insidious force tugging at the ship's operations, as if the alien vessel was probing, trying to learn the ship's responses. Commander Ellis stood at the command console, her mind working through 1,000 possibilities, none of which seemed reassuring. She glanced at the screens once more. The alien ship, while appearing distant, had not backed away. It loomed out there in space, an enigma, its surface shimmering faintly as though responding to the darkness around them. The alien craft had made no sudden moves, but its eerie calm left them wondering if it was preparing something. Every second that passed brought with it the feeling that they were moving closer to a decision point, one that could either spell their salvation or their doom. "We've done everything we can to make contact, Captain," Reynolds said from his post, his face tense. "The signals are growing stronger, but they're still in that same strange pattern. We're no closer to understanding them." Ellis nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settling over her. The alien ship was not attacking, but it was clearly probing. And the fact that their own systems were being affected by the pulses meant that whatever was happening was no accident. "Keep trying," Ellis ordered, turning back to her console. "There has to be something we're missing, some clue we haven't picked up on yet." Lieutenant Jones glanced over at the sensor readings. "Captain, the fleet of alien ships has not moved, but they're not just waiting. They're watching. All their systems are active, but none of them are taking any action. It's like they're waiting for us to make the first move." The crew felt the silence thickening. The longer they remained at this stalemate, the greater the pressure seemed to grow. Ellis knew that if the Dominion made any sort of move, it could shift the balance. They were being tested, there was no doubt about that. But by whom? And for what purpose? "We're being studied," Ellis muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. The thought felt unsettling in her chest, but it made sense. They're learning from us, watching how we react, how we operate. This isn't just an encounter, it's an examination. The question is, why? The alien ship seemed to drift closer, but there was no change in its movement pattern. No new data, no new signals. It was like the ship had slowed down just enough to stay within the Dominion's range, keeping them on edge without making any further moves. Jones spoke again, his voice a mix of concern and curiosity. "Captain, the pulses, they're changing again. But this time, it's almost as if they're sensing with our systems in real time. It's like they're waiting for us to respond, in the exact way they expect." Ellis' eyes widened. "You mean to say they're anticipating our next move?" "That's exactly what it looks like," Jones said, his eyes glued to his console. "It's like they know our every action before we do it. They're predicting our behavior." A cold realization settled in. The alien ship wasn't just a passive observer, it was actively manipulating the situation. The crew of the Dominion had no way of knowing whether the ship was merely observing or subtly guiding them toward a response. They were walking a fine line, and every decision felt more like a test than a tactic. Every move they made could be exactly what the aliens were waiting for. Ellis took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. If they're predicting us, then we have to be careful. We can't just react impulsively. We need to be smarter than that. Her eyes scanned the bridge, meeting the gazes of her officers. Each of them was struggling with the uncertainty, the pressure mounting on their shoulders as they tried to navigate this strange encounter. No one had signed up for this. No one had expected to face an alien race that could predict their every move, bending their perception of what was possible. "Reynolds," Ellis said, turning toward him. "How close are we to decoding the communication?" Reynolds shook his head. "We're still getting nothing, Captain. There's a pattern, yes, but it's not enough to decipher. Every time we think we're making progress, it changes again. It's like it's testing us too." The thought echoed in Ellis' mind. The aliens were testing them, not only with their strange signals, but also by controlling the situation around them. Every response from the crew seemed to drive the aliens' next actions. She knew they couldn't stay in this uncertain state forever. Eventually, something would have to give. Either the aliens would reveal their hand, or the Dominion would make the first move. Ellis took a steadying breath, then turned to her crew with resolve. "We can't stay in limbo. We need to take action. I want all systems prepared for anything, but no moves without my order." She paused, eyes narrowing as she watched the alien ship on the view screen. "Let's be the ones who decide when this game ends." The crew nodded, their expressions hardening with determination. They were a long way from their homes, lost in the vastness of space, surrounded by ships that were not of their making. Yet now, they had to decide their fate. Would they act first, or would they continue to wait for the aliens to make their move? Ellis knew one thing. The aliens were watching, but so were they. Every second that passed felt like a weight, a pressure that could break if they didn't make the right choice. And as the alien ship loomed in the distance, with its slow, calculated movements, Ellis realized that whatever happened next would be a turning point. The choices they made now would shape the future of the Dominion and its crew. Whatever the aliens wanted, they would have to find a way to meet them halfway. Or maybe, just maybe, the crew of the Dominion could surprise them. The quiet tension that had settled over the bridge of the Dominion was becoming almost unbearable. The crew had been on edge for days now, locked in a standoff with an alien presence that seemed to be one step ahead of them at every turn. The strange pulses continued, their patterns shifting in ways that were impossible to predict, and the crew had come to understand that the aliens weren't just watching. They were waiting for something that only they seemed to understand. Commander Ellis sat at the front of the bridge, her hands resting on the command console, her eyes fixed on the alien ship. It still hovered out there, an immovable force in the vast emptiness of space. The ship's surface shimmered faintly, as if responding to some unseen rhythm. It was a beautiful thing, in its own way, its sleek design almost elegant in its mystery. But that beauty only served to deepen the unease that Ellis felt every time she looked at it. The longer they remained in this standoff, the more the feeling of being trapped deepened. It was as though the Dominion and her crew were part of some game that they didn't understand, and the rules were changing faster than they could keep up. "Captain," Reynolds said, his voice cutting through the silence, "we've detected a fluctuation in the signal. It's different this time." Ellis straightened in her seat, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, different?" "It's almost like a command," Reynolds continued, his hands flying over his console as he processed the data. "It's not just a signal anymore. It's directing us, pushing us towards something. But I can't pinpoint what it's trying to do. It's almost like the alien ship is pulling us in." Ellis' mind raced. The situation was becoming more complex by the minute. The aliens hadn't made any overt moves, but they were clearly exerting influence over the Dominion, testing them, guiding them, trying to steer their actions. This wasn't just a passive observation anymore. The stakes were higher. They were being manipulated, and it wasn't clear whether it was for good or ill. "Can we block it?" Ellis asked, her voice steady despite the churn of thoughts in her head. "We're trying," Reynolds replied. "But the signal is too integrated with our systems. It's like it knows how to bypass our defenses. It's almost as if it's speaking directly to the ship itself, not just to us." A chill ran down Ellis' spine. If the aliens could control the Dominion systems this way, there was no telling what they might do next. She turned toward Jones, who had been silently observing the readings. "Jones, any progress on the code?" Jones shook his head. "No, Captain. Whatever the aliens are using to communicate, it's not based on any known language or system we've encountered. It's something new, something entirely foreign. It's like they're speaking to us in a way that we don't even have the capacity to understand." The realization hit Ellis hard. The alien race wasn't just different in terms of their technology. They were fundamentally different in the way they communicated, the way they thought. And they were making it clear that they held the upper hand. This wasn't just an encounter between two different species. It was an encounter between two entirely different ways of perceiving the universe. The Dominion and its crew were struggling to understand a language they couldn't even begin to comprehend. "We're running out of time," Ellis said, her voice tight with the weight of the situation. "If we don't find a way to respond, we'll be completely at their mercy. I won't let that happen." Jones looked up, his face pale. "But Captain, we don't even know if they mean us harm. They haven't attacked. They haven't done anything aggressive." Ellis considered his words. It was true that the aliens hadn't made any hostile moves, but there was something far more unnerving about the situation. The aliens weren't reacting out of fear or aggression. They were observing, yes, but they were also guiding the crew of the Dominion in a way that made it impossible to predict their next move. It was as if they had all the time in the world, while the Dominion and her crew were racing against the clock. "We can't afford to be passive anymore," Ellis said, her voice firm. "We need to be proactive. We need to figure out what they want, what they're after. We can't let them pull the strings any longer." She turned back to the view screen, her eyes locked on the alien ship. It was still there, still watching, still waiting. But what was it waiting for? The pulse of the signal continued, steady and rhythmic, like the beating of a distant heart. It was as though the alien ship had become part of the very fabric of space around them, an unmovable presence in the void. "We need to make contact," Ellis said, her decision final. "Reynolds, I want you to try every communication frequency we have. We're not going to wait for them to make the first move. We're going to take the initiative." "Understood, Captain," Reynolds replied, his hands already working furiously on the console. Ellis took a deep breath, bracing herself for whatever might come next. She didn't know what the alien race wanted, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to stand by and let them dictate the terms of this encounter. The crew of the Dominion had come too far, fought too hard, to be passive now. As Reynolds worked, the tension in the room seemed to shift. The crew was focused, determined. They were no longer reacting to the situation. They were taking control of it. And that, Ellis knew, was the first step toward gaining the upper hand. The alien ship remained motionless in the distance, its presence hanging over them like an invisible weight. But now, for the first time since this encounter had begun, Ellis felt a flicker of hope. The crew of the Dominion wasn't trapped in the aliens' game anymore. They had their own plan. The next move, whatever it was theirs to make. The Dominion drifted through the emptiness of space, its crew now on edge, but also determined. Commander Ellis could feel the weight of the moment in every corner of the ship. The crew had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment. And now it was time to take the initiative. The alien vessel, still silent, loomed ahead, its presence a constant reminder that the crew had come to a precipice. This wasn't just an encounter anymore. It was a battle of wills, an encounter that would shape the future of the Dominion and its crew. "Captain," Reynolds called, his voice steady but tense. "We've established a direct link to the alien ship. It's different this time. The signal is stronger. They're responding." Ella's heart skipped a beat. The moment they had been waiting for had arrived. But she knew that it wasn't just about making contact. It was about how they would be received. The aliens had tested them, prodded them, guided them, but this was their chance to finally get some answers. "On screen?" Ellis ordered, her voice calm but firm. The main view screen flickered and came to life. The alien ship, so distant before, was now closer, almost as if it had shifted slightly toward them. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly glow, the lights dancing across its sleek, metallic hull. The ship was alien in every sense of the word. Its contours were unlike anything the crew had ever seen, and yet there was something hypnotic about its design. The signal came through, clearer now. It wasn't just a pulse, it was a message, but it was encoded in a way that no human language could have prepared them for. It was unlike any form of communication the crew had encountered before. More complex, more intricate, almost like a pattern woven into a language that wasn't just words, but thoughts. Ellis felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment of truth. They had been trying to make sense of the alien signals for so long, but now they had to interpret the message before it was too late. "We're getting a lot of noise in the signal," Reynolds reported, tapping away at his console. "But wait, there's a shift in the pattern. It's changing, adjusting. It's like they're waiting for us to respond." Jones, who had been silent for a long while, stepped forward. "Captain, if they're adjusting, they may be looking for something in our response. They might not be testing us anymore. They could be trying to engage us on a deeper level. We need to be careful how we react." Ellis nodded thoughtfully. The alien ship's behavior was unlike anything they had seen before. It wasn't just an attack or a defense. It was a conversation, a silent dialogue in the language of the stars. "But how did you speak back to something that was so different from anything you knew? How did you communicate with a species that seemed to know more about them than they did about themselves?" "I know," Ellis said quietly, "but it's too late for caution. We have to respond. We can't wait for them to make all the moves anymore. This is our chance to step forward." "Understood, Captain," Reynolds said, his fingers flying across the console as he worked to send a signal back to the alien ship. He adjusted frequencies, tried different combinations, but there was something different about the pattern the aliens were sending. It was as if they were speaking a language that could not be expressed in simple code or sound. Ellis could see it in their eyes. The uncertainty, the tension, the hope that this would work, the hope that this encounter, this moment, could be the one that changed everything. And then, without warning, the alien ship responded again, this time in a way that was unmistakable. The shimmer of the ship's surface brightened, and the pulses became rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The message was clear now. They were waiting for the Dominion's crew to acknowledge them. They wanted a connection, not just a conversation. They wanted to see how the humans would react. Ellis took a deep breath and made a decision. "Reynolds, send a response. Open a direct channel. We're not hiding anymore. Let's show them who we are." The crew watched as the signal was sent. It was a simple message, but it was enough. It was a sign of recognition, a gesture that said, "We understand you're there, and we're not afraid." For a long moment, nothing happened. The ship was still. The crew held their breath. Had they done the right thing? Had they opened the door to something they weren't prepared for? And then, slowly, the alien ship began to move. But it wasn't aggressive. It wasn't an attack. It was more like a greeting. The pulses that had been so dissonant before now synchronized, flowing together in a harmonious pattern that seemed almost peaceful. The ship's surface shimmered again, this time brighter, and for the first time since the encounter began, Ellis felt something shift in the air. The alien ship was communicating. It wasn't just a test anymore. It was a bridge between their two worlds. And as the Dominion's crew stood there, Uncertain but resolute, Ellis realized that this was just the beginning. They had passed the test, not by responding with violence, not by hiding, but by stepping forward, by acknowledging the unknown. There was no telling what would come next. The future was still uncertain. But now, for the first time, the crew of the Dominion was not alone in the vastness of space. They had made contact. They had taken the first step toward understanding the aliens. The next steps were theirs to take. And with that realization, Ellis couldn't help but smile. The Dominion had just crossed the threshold. What lay beyond would be a journey no one could predict, but one they were ready to face. Together.